Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Rise Up, Ignite Your Life, the Battle to Be Trauma Transformation podcast. I'm your host, Krista Fee, and I'm really excited to come to you this week, because this is our 1-year anniversary from our 501c3 nonprofit. So we are currently recording our last 4 episodes of our very first season, our very first year. And in this year of being in existence, we have published original PTSD research. We have created a modular program, a system that can be incorporated into organizations that are looking to protect the mental health of their employees. We have people in positions in search and rescue, in the fire department, and in the police department, all representing our program. We have helped 67 families through our Ferryman mission program, where we take one-of-a-kind plaques to families of our fallen heroes. Most of those are suicides, to hold space and to have real human connection with families that are feeling closed off or left out of the life that they have given so much for. And we have, just this month, we have assisted 14 one-on-one individuals through their post-traumatic occupational traumatic stress journey, saving marriages, stopping suicides, and getting people back onto the road of recovery and self-empowerment. And all of this we couldn't have done without your support, both through watching our podcast, sharing our posts, and being involved in our program, and our sponsors and the donations that you guys make to our programs. We are 100% funded by our communities. We do not get any federal funding as of yet. It usually takes 2 to 3 years of existing to be able to access those kind of grants and those kind of services. So you guys have shown us in this, just in our very first year, how much faith you have in us, how important this project is. And we are super, super proud to represent our communities in leading the charge against occupational traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress in our communities. So today I want to bring you an amazing guest who has an extraordinary background, not just in law enforcement, but in emergency medicine as well. So please welcome David Berez.
Hi, how are you?
I am wonderful. It's so great to have you here today. These are really important conversations to have, and I love bringing real people who have really diverse stories to show people that post-traumatic stress and the experiences of first responders, there's no cookie cutter way that this presents. It's not predictable. It's not everybody goes into a box. It's very unique to each of us, and we need to be able to recognize first responders as human beings and individuals first and foremost. So let's begin by talking about your childhood a little bit. Who was little David, and what did you have visions for your future and for yourself?
Great question. First, I just want to say thank you for having me here today. And it's kind of exciting to be part of your anniversary episodes. I think that's really special. You guys are doing such amazing work with your organization. And one of the things that I have actually as my tagline for my email is earn your badge every day. And you guys are certainly doing that. So thank you for everything that you guys do.
Thank you.
So who is little David? Little David had I think a normal childhood, but normal is obviously in the eyes of the beholder. My parents were divorced by the time I was 13. My dad had been cheating on my mom most of my youth. He was there in a absent kind of way for us when I was a kid. I also had some physical health issues growing up, starting from the first week of life. My grandmother had found me in my crib dead. and had revived me at a week old. So that was the beginning of my health issues. And I ended up with, all kinds of sinus infections, colds. I just was a sick kid all the time. So I had a lot of exposure to medical staff. I was, in and out of the hospital a lot. And by the time I was 7, I had my tonsils and adenoids removed, which then kind of solved a lot of those childhood medical issues. But the reason I bring that up is because I wanted to be a doctor because of it. I had no understanding of really what law enforcement was. My dad was a reservist in the military when I was a kid. So I had some kind of that like uniformed exposure, but I didn't really know I still don't know what he ever did in the military. But he just his presence coming and going in a uniform every, once a month on the weekends or, 2 weeks a year, kind of gave me that exposure to, wow, that's kind of cool. And it was something that I knew I eventually wanted to do something that was identifiable. And, as a kid, I thought it was medicine because that was the exposure I had. But as I got older and I realized the family stress that we were going through, between my parents' relationship and then their divorce, there was police involvement in that as an early teen. And I recognized the work that those guys did coming in, fixing our problems-ish. And I was like, wow, that's cooler than medicine. You're actually having an immediate effect on people day to day. And it kind of started sparking something in me. And then by the time I was 14, I kind of combined the two and I became a volunteer EMT. And it was cool to have the lights and sirens. It was cool to have the uniform, but it was also cool to help people when they needed it the most. And so I volunteered starting at the age of 14, became an EMT by 16. I was involved in all the rescue side as well. I was a rescue technician by the time I was 18 and took all those skills to college with me and volunteered throughout my college experience as well up to the age of 24 when I became a police officer. But I think the primary influences in my life on the trauma side were certainly my medical health and then, my parents' lack of relationship and the mental abuse that went on inside my house throughout my childhood.
It's part of the conversation that we ignore frequently when we talk about our first responders and we talk about occupational traumatic stress. We like to package it all up as being because of the job. But what we're seeing scientifically is that oftentimes there's a connection between adverse childhood experiences, which we talked about briefly, and going into these emergency fields. So we're also thinking that there is a predisposition towards reacting to occupational traumatic stress more significantly when we have these adverse childhood experiences. And you had mentioned that you've actually taken the ACE questionnaire, which for those of you that don't know, ACE is a standardized questionnaire that tells us, it gives us some predictive information as to how significant the trauma background of an individual is and whether there's developmental trauma present. So the higher the ACE number, the more questions you answer yes to, the more likely you're going to be, theoretically, to experience occupational traumatic stress in the future. So you were surprised when you took that questionnaire.
I was, as kids, we don't think about these things, right? We just deal with them and we move on. Some of them stink, some of them just whatever. And as an adult, I never really, as you alluded to, thought about all of those childhood experiences and how they led me to where I came through in my career or to where I am today. And about a year ago, when I was introduced to the whole ACEs concept and took that test, I was like, holy cow. I was like a 7 out of 10 on that thing. And, beyond the recognition of the childhood trauma and where that may have led you today, that higher that score also leads to a propensity of suicide. So the one thing it did for me is it allowed me to recognize that my own chances of self-inflicted harm if a trigger, would come my way would be higher than somebody else experiencing the same thing. So it's something I'm conscious of, that I don't allow myself to slip into that space.
The other thing that's really interesting about this test that I'd like to mention briefly is, did you feel at all diagnosed or stigmatized by having this knowledge, or did this knowledge actually provide you awareness and tools that you could look at and see those vulnerabilities and go, oh, hey, I can solve this. This is not something that I have to be a victim to.
Yeah, I never really had the victim mentality to begin with, no matter what stage of life I was in. So I don't feel that having that knowledge now puts me in that space, and I don't feel stigmatized at all. I feel empowered, to be honest with you, because now I know that the scientific possibilities exist, that I am in a more vulnerable place for my own mental health than somebody else that has, had the same exact experiences as me as a professional, knowing what my childhood background was. So I'm just it makes me conscious of it, to give me, it's just another tool to be able to support yourself, and support others, to be quite frank. Because when other people that you work with or have relationships with have a conceptual idea of their background and how that plays into their mental health, I think you can help support them through their current challenges.
I love this mentality. I love your strength, because this is a challenging conversation for people. Sometimes people take that information as as it's inevitable and there's nothing they can do about it, when what this information is supposed to do is what it's done for you: give you power and choice to say, this is a potential vulnerability. I can address this. I can take charge of my life and make sure that this doesn't have a negative outcome for me. So
It gave
thank
me
you.
context, it gave me definition. And it's, again, just, it's an added tool, and it shouldn't be used as a weakness. It should be used as a strength, for sure.
Yes, I love that so much. So talk a little bit about your experience uh, in both of those positions, in your law enforcement and in your emergency medicine.
So, as an EMT, again, I started as a volunteer when I was 14, and took the class when we were 16, which is the state minimum here in New Jersey. Um, it was awesome, by the way. It gave me an education that you can't get in school, uh, and you just can't get on your daily life. You get to see the best and worst of everybody, from the most horrific deaths to helping with childbirth. So it's the two ends of life. And at the age of 16, let's say 14 to 18, when your brain development is at its peak, a lot of those experiences become a great education, but at the same time, they're not being processed properly, because your brain doesn't have the ability to do that. So it just, you never deal with the emotions of it. You're dealing with the process of it, of the event itself, not what you're thinking about long term. And then as I went through finished college, went through the police academy, and did 20 years in law enforcement, again, you have all these experiences that you don't process in real time. So then they end up sitting with you in a box in the back of your head. And at the worst times in your life, they open up and spill out all over the place. But it's honestly, I loved my career. I was, during my police career, I was mostly narcotics work. I was a drug recognition expert. I loved that. I became an impairment expert, recognized in courts all across New Jersey for that, which was a great experience. And then the community policing aspect is also something I really enjoyed. The benefit of seeing a smile on a kid's face when a police officer does something for them is really special. And that's what really got me up every morning to go to work. And I loved every minute of the community policing aspect.
You like people.
It's funny that you say that. I do love people, but at the same time, I hate people. And most cops will tell you that. We see the best and worst of folks, and nothing really in between. So when you're doing that community policing work, you really see the good humans in your community, in your world. But when people call for the police because they need them, it's at their absolute lowest point in life. And you see more of that than not. and then you become jaded and you hate people. But for the most part, yes, I love networking. I love being with people. I love supporting folks in the best way that I know how, that I can, because that's what makes me feel good.
Do you feel like there's any connection, or was there for you, in having the childhood experiences that you had and then choosing to go into a helping profession?
You have to believe that there's definitely a connection there. When I teach the resiliency program that I'm involved with, one of the things that pops up regularly is sexual assault. And I know that's a really heavy topic, but this is not scientific research at all, but I would have to say somewhere around 80% of the women in law enforcement that I've come in contact with, especially through the resiliency program, have been sexually assaulted as kids, or even as young adults, and about 60% of the men. So every time we open these classes up and we have the introductions, it's amazing to me how many law enforcement officers have had these adverse childhood experiences, obviously sexual assault being the worst of it. And just, you got to believe that those experiences have led all first responders, even medical staff, to doing the work that they do, because it helps solve some of their own strife and their emotions to be able to give back and help others, especially in response to those that helped them along the way. So I think, yeah, there's absolutely a connection there.
And have you been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress?
So I've never gone that route. I've never had a diagnosis. I've never sought psychological assistance in the conventional way. And I think some of that comes, for me at least, it comes with some biases of experiences that I've had, both as a child. I know when my parents were going through a divorce, my mom had me seeing a counselor that was not a good fit for me. And I think when you do seek that kind of help, cultural competency is very important, and it's not going to be the same for everybody. So that was my first exposure to it and turned me off right away. And then as an adult and a father, I have a son who we brought to seek some professional counseling early on in his childhood, because he was struggling with what we now know as ADHD symptoms. And we didn't really understand that at the forefront of his expression of his symptoms. And so we sought some psychological help. And I'll never forget this. The psychologist told my son in front of me that I was most of his problem, which comes from my law enforcement background.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it really turned me off from ever going to see anybody in the mental health field like that again. And I know that's not fair, because there are so many great counselors out there. There's so many great doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists. But I didn't cross paths with one that was culturally competent in the experiences that I had, and it really soured me. So I never got diagnosed. No. Long answer for a short question.
No, it's really interesting you say that, because this is a conversation we have very, very frequently. And I am seeking education. I'm going for my doctorate and I'm following that traditional pathway. But what's really interesting is most of the clients that I work with, most of the people that come to me, have come to me because they've gone that traditional pathway. They've sought a therapist or a counselor that's more traditional, and they didn't have the ability to work with trauma, or they didn't have the ability to work with first responders. And there's two really high level specialties there.
Mm-hmm.
Working with trauma is its own set of tons of different, like, you have to know a lot of different things that aren't just normal psychology. And then going into having that cultural competency with first responders is a totally different animal. If you've never been a first responder, there's no education that's going to give that to you. You're
No.
never going to fully understand and appreciate what's going to be said and the way it's going to be said, and you're never going to connect and understand. So to create more, we need more people who are from the field, going through the education, getting the resources, becoming therapists, and focusing their services back into the first responder field. And that's a lot. That's asking a lot of people. So there is a shortage. There's a national shortage of people that are qualified and capable of doing this work. Just because a therapist is licensed as a therapist doesn't mean they're going to be able to or should be working with first responders with these scenarios, because we've heard things just in my clinic. I've had people come in and say, my therapist cried when I told her about my experience, and I had to support her.
Yeah, I've
That's
heard
not
that
working.
story more than once.
Right. That's not working. That's problematic. That's damaging. That's just putting you guys back into work zone, and
Yep.
you're having to take care of someone else and you're not getting any care. And the other is therapists that say things that they shouldn't say, like, how could you? Or when we're already dealing with people who have guilt and shame and especially survivor's guilt or something along those lines, and then someone turns around and says, how could you? That's a trigger for suicide. We're literally, that is a potentially fatal error, and we're not holding therapists accountable for saying, I'm qualified to work with you, or I maybe should refer you off to someone who is qualified to work with you. So it's a conversation I think we need to have, that yes, we love the therapists and we want to promote them and we want to say this is a good profession, but we also want to hold them accountable to recognize their individual skills and limitations, and
I
to
agree.
say, okay, look, this isn't my client. This is not someone I should work with. And to build relationships with other resources that are qualified to work with first responders, because it is very unique and it does require a different skill set.
No, I completely agree. And I think where we've struggled on a societal level with that is, every third show on TV is a first responder show. So, I wouldn't go in to defend a murderer or prosecute a murderer because I watched 3 episodes of Law and Order. But the greater community and society thinks they know what cops do or firefighters do because they've watched Chicago PD, and it's just not how life works. It's TV, and we can't train ourselves or school ourselves based on a 1 hour show. And I think that has creeped into all parts of our society. And you're right. For a therapist or a practitioner, mental health practitioner of any level, needs to understand that accountability is what needs to be had to make sure that that first responder gets the appropriate care that they need.
Ooh, I'm pushing buttons today. I don't usually challenge the field too much, but being in the field and observing so much and seeing so many people who fall out of that system, uh, there are times it becomes very frustrating because we depend on those titles, we depend on those jobs, not knowing, as people who are seeking services, not knowing how to find that match, not knowing how to find that person who's going to be for us, because there's no specialty. Like, it's just challenging. So
One of the pieces that I've seen to work really successfully as of recent is the peer-to-peer model that's supported by a medical director of some kind, whether it's a licensed therapist or an actual doctor in psychology or psychiatry. But the peer-to-peer model seems to be working so much better than what I've seen in the past of traditional mental health medicine. And you're getting that culturally competent peer that has some training on how to guide you. And we're using the QPR model where you can help the person out in understanding and listening. You can make suggestions, and then if they need, you can make referrals. And that's where the mental health clinician comes in. But the peer-to-peer model is kind of that interim piece that may just give that additional bit of support that an individual needs to, when they come to that Y in the road, whether they're going to go the suicidal route or find strength to move forward in a different direction. And often that peer-to-peer model allows them to take that right turn instead of the left. And it seems to be functional and it seems to be working.
It's often the step that's needed to get people to accept or be
Correct.
prepared for the
Yep.
next step. And not everyone needs therapy. Oh my gosh, I said it. Just because someone is having symptoms of post-traumatic or occupational stress, not everyone needs therapy, not everyone needs medication. Those things are useful and valuable, but they are not necessitated to everyone. So we're
I completely
talking
agree.
about a huge trauma spectrum. We're talking about tons of people who have symptoms, most of which wouldn't fall into the diagnostic criteria. But everyone on the spectrum of having trauma reactivity needs tools and resources, needs support, and needs to be able to feel comfortable in their emotions and expressing their experiences. But not everyone needs therapy. So the peer model reaches that 75 or 80 or plus more percent of people that aren't diagnostic and don't need medication and therapy.
I
So
agree.
most people are in that sub diagnostic area. And if peer support were universally accepted and universally applied with high quality training, I think we could probably get underneath the problem and we would actually see a shift in the suicide rate, in the
I
suicide
agree.
numbers.
And I think one of the best preventers of all of that are the buddy check-ins. There's many different cute acronyms for it, but buddy check-ins I think are just so important. Pick 3 people a day and send a text to them, and you just may be that one person that's actually reaching out. And I say that often. Be the one because nobody else may be doing it, and the effect you can have on someone, even if they're not your best friend, just someone you happen to know that they're struggling with something, just shoot them a text, say, hey, thinking about you today. I hope you're doing okay. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. That's all it takes. And it might be that just small piece of intervention that other person then stops and pauses for a minute and goes, wow, somebody does care. And it changes the mindset. It changes that negative into a positive. And like we often say in the resiliency programs, joy and hate and fear, they can't live in the same place at the same time. So if you can make somebody happy in that moment, that may be what changes the direction for them for the day. Buddy check-ins are so important. That's the first piece of the peer-to-peer concept.
We see oftentimes people who have attempted to commit suicide, and again, not statistically, not going into the science of this, but just in clinic, people who have attempted to commit suicide, the number one thing I hear, well, 2 things. One is, I felt like if I took my life, it would be easier for everyone else around me. That burdensomeness piece is the number one thing. And the other thing that I hear is, if someone would have just said something to me that day, if someone would have just noticed that I was around or just said, hey, if someone would have said anything to me, it would have changed everything.
And that there's that very, very small window of doubt when somebody's suicidal. And it just takes that phone to ring, that text to come in, that changes the whole course of what's about to happen. And so it's so important just to reach out to your friends, even not your friends, just colleagues, coworkers, anybody. Just be the one to care.
Yeah, some of this I think is based in that our rational minds understand that we're not a burden. Our rational minds understand that what we're telling ourselves is untrue. So there's a conflict happening there. And if somebody reaches out, it tips that belief system, it tips that knowing a little bit further to the conscious mind and gets some
Absolutely.
of those negative unconscious beliefs out of the way. And you can actually tell yourself, oh, but I am valuable, but I do matter, but somebody does care about me. And sometimes we just need a little evidence
I agree.
to push to push us across that boundary.
I agree.
So There is a card that I post up on the website that is this just some questions to ask people if they seem off, if they seem like they're in a mood, to be blatant and just say, so how are you feeling today? Is there something I can do for you? But even further than that, if your friend seems off, so are you contemplating taking your own life? Be just blatant about it, because in our industries, this happens. We see it all the time. So shake it up and just say, hey, are you thinking about this? And if the answer is, people are truthful more
Yep.
often than not. They'll literally be like, "Hey, how'd you know?" Like they don't often hide it. Statistically, we've shown that the people who are actually contemplating suicide will look you in the eye and say, "Yeah, I have been thinking that." Because you startle them
It's
in
a
that.
satisfaction thing for them on both sides of it. So the idea of taking your own life and making that decision and firming your decision to do that is one of the more positive. It sounds crazy. One of the more positive moments in that person's life at that point, because it's they've made that decision to go forward, and they see happiness in that. So quite often before, or you'll hear actually post completion of suicide, you hear, "What, man, that person just had the greatest week I've ever seen them have." Well, it's because the week prior to that, they decided that's what they were going to do. So they were now happy about it. But yeah, and they're happy to tell you, which is, to someone who's rational, is not rational. But that person who's contemplating suicide, that thought is not rational. So they will tell you that, which is crazy. And I wish I knew that earlier on in my life, because we've all lost people to that. And that's kind of why many of us do this work. And my buddy Danny, who took his life January 29th of 2020, that set me down this course of trying to help others in this way. I didn't ask that question, and I regret it, because I spoke to him the day before he committed suicide. And if I knew to ask that question, I don't know if things would have been different or not. He was, pretty committed. But I always wonder if I knew more than I knew now, that if I knew more then than as much as I know now, would things have been different? I don't know the answer, but I certainly question it.
So crazy question, and probably really intrusive. But throughout your career, have you ever had serious considerations for yourself?
Yeah,
Did you ever
absolutely.
think about it?
Um, Two times in my life, one was more serious than others. Uh, and I was on the way home from work. I was involved in a internal affairs complaint that was literally internal, had nothing to do with anything other than an administrative ruling. And I was caught in a war of words, essentially, and there was no real way for me to satisfy the issue. And I knew that it wasn't going to end in my favor, because it never started to end in my favor. The investigation was kind of, we're going after this guy, and this is why, and this is how we're going to do it. So it was unfortunate, and I felt like, everything was ending around me. I had a plan on the way home that day, and it was a midnight shift, so I was going home at like 6 a.m. And the phone rang. It was my son, because I just wanted to call and say good morning. I wasn't sure if you'd be home before I get to school, before I leave for school. And we had, probably an 8-minute conversation that put me through that gap. And I didn't know it at the time, but a day later, I'm like, that's weird. I wasn't supposed to be here today. And that phone call was my turning point, which I think is pretty cool. So I will always have him to thank for that, and I look forward to someday telling him that story. But the other point in my life where things were kind of dark and shady was after I retired, and the honeymoon period of being off was over, and it was right in the beginning. So I retired January 1st of 2020, and then that 30-day honeymoon period was awesome. Then kind of COVID started bubbling up, and by the beginning of March, we were in that full-blown COVID situation. And I didn't know where things were going for me. I didn't know what I was going to do to keep myself occupied. And because I had way too much time on my hands, all the 20 years of police work and then 10 years of EMS before that kind of started bubbling over. I wasn't sleeping. I was miserable. I was having nightmares. I call them flashbacks. I don't know if that's true. Like just recalling certain calls for service that I was reprocessing and regretting the outcomes of, and should I have done this differently? We're talking 20 years old stuff, but I never processed it throughout my career. So in this time of like void, everything started coming out and bubbling over. And then I was in a pretty bad spot through the first 6 months of 2020. And then when my buddy Danny died by suicide, I was like, you know what? That could have just as easily been me. And I was trying to work him through some of the issues he was facing, which was mostly betrayal. And I recognized that after his death, that's what he was struggling with in just about every aspect of his life. And I just made a vow that I'd never be in that position to leave my family like that, and seeing what it did to his family and friends. And that was my turning point. I knew I was never going back, but I was going to make it my life's work to try to help others, not do what he did. So.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your honesty and your straightforward, real talk. We need real talk.
Here's what it is. You can't hide it. As first responders, we all get to a dark place. We just see the worst of life sometimes, but we have to be able to process it. And certainly, processing it alone is not helpful, I don't think. Finding your tribe that is comforting to you to be able to process those journeys together is so important. And one of the things that I often end up in conversations about is the transition from your public service work into retirement. And you have to do it with purpose, and you have to do it with people. Because if you try to do that alone, like I did, by the way, I never had any of these conversations before I retired. I figured this out the hard way on my own. I wish somebody would have talked to me about this stuff beforehand. It would have made my process and my transition a lot easier. But I remember calling my buddy Joe at I don't know, it's probably the end of February, beginning of March. I'm like, dude, I'm miserable. Because we retired the same day. He goes, I know, me too. I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, I'm not sleeping. I'm having these weird nightmares, these dreams. He goes, I know, me too. It's crazy, but I don't want to say anything to anybody. I'm like, well, why not? He goes, well, I don't want anybody to think I'm nuts. And, he had some substance abuse issues with alcohol throughout the course of his life and his career. And he's like, I just don't want anybody to think I was drinking again. I'm like, are you? And he's like, not really, because I have a beer every now and again. He goes, but I don't really drink anymore. But because I just didn't want people to think I was nuts going through all of this. Nobody talks about it. So that's why I was like, you know what? We have to change that. And that's why I feel comfortable saying the quiet parts out loud, because somebody's got to. And I'm not a hero in doing it, but hopefully it spawns a conversation for other people to do the same. And, it's that ripple effect. So.
And this is a really good point to talk about how occupational traumatic stress or traumatic stress across the lifetime, how our experiences can look differently for different people. Because many of my guests, many of the people that I've interviewed in the past have had a progressive, cumulative trauma experience. So their symptoms hit relatively early on, 5 to 10 years into their careers, and they are not coping appropriately. And it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse until it hits a culmination point where your experience is much more like mine. You go into the job, you are adrenaline junkie. You're like, give me all the worst cases, give me all that. Like, I love this. This is the best thing ever. And you go and you go and you go and you go until you don't. And it's not until that moment when you stop that stuff starts hitting you. So it can look two very different ways and everything in between. So I had the same thing. I was completely fine. And then all of a sudden I wasn't. And I was thinking about things that happened 30 years ago and having close my eyes, and the vision is on the back of my eyelids, which is the weirdest thing to memories, moments, smells, the whole thing is all just present all of a sudden. And that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, why am I sitting there thinking about it now? And it's just present. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're in it all the time, that that's all we're thinking about, that it's taken over our lives, but it's present with us. And now we have to look at it. So in that, we have to deal with it or put it back away.
And I don't think putting it back away is helpful. So one thing that I've learned along the course of my journey, and it was a gift given to me by a woman named Sarah Carell, who's the host or the producer of a program called The Power of Our Story. And for those that are not familiar with that, I highly suggest you look it up and be part of it. She developed this platform. It's actually pre-COVID. And then when COVID hit, everything went to Zoom. And what that did is expanded it to anybody. It wasn't just her little local community. And essentially, she calls it coffee and conversation. So it started out as like a fire pit chat with a bunch of folks from one of her classes. And when COVID hit, she took that fireside chat to Zoom, and she opens up these conversations, and it allows people to come in and tell their story. And therefore the name of the group, The Power of Our Story. And just hearing your own words out loud, your own thoughts out loud for the first time is incredibly powerful. And being able to just let your thoughts just exit your body through the power of your story, and telling it out loud like that is just, it's cathartic, but it's also so helpful for other people to understand that they're not going through this process and this journey alone. And so many of us, while our backgrounds are different, our individual facts of our stories are different, we're all going through the same types of emotions. They may be processed in different order. You may see them come out in different ways, but it's in the inside, it's all the same. So for people to understand that there's somebody else that's experienced the same thing is so important. And then for you to hear your story out loud for the first time is coming out of your mouth is so powerful, so powerful. So yeah, that's my advice is talk about your journey, because you're not doing it just for yourself, you're doing it for others as well.
And the more we talk about it, the more we get this reality out there, the more we show different people having similar experiences in different ways. The more that we show all of this connection and all of this diversity at the same time, the more that we just show you that it's affecting us all, and that it's okay to have your experience your way. It's okay to express your emotions your way, and that there's no right or wrong way to be in the healing process. There's no right or wrong way to be human. There's no right or wrong way to be a first responder struggling with first responder issues. Everyone is unique, but we're all in this together. We're all family, and we don't necessarily know you, but we are here for you. And our stories are available to you. And the resources that we've used to get to where we are available to you. And we're all happy to share, though this was the path that I took, these are the things that I tried. They might not work for you. There's no one solution, but these are things you can try. And I'm happy to walk beside you as you do.
Absolutely. It's so important. Having that tribe of familiarity around you is so powerful.
So what are you doing now to help others?
Doing now, I so many different things. Honestly, because I officially retired from the police department, I can do whatever the heck makes me happy. And here in New Jersey, we have a very good public safety pension system for police and fire, which is makes it very easy to then do things that make you happy, because you don't necessarily have to work for pay the bills. And so one of the main things that I love to do is helping other police officers that need the support. So that's kind of where I've netted out over the last couple of years. And I do that through being a facilitator for a program called Resilient Minds on the Front Lines. I'm also a consultant for New Jersey's Office of Resiliency for Law Enforcement, which is through the Attorney General's Office and the Department of Public Safety. And I try to do everything I can to support my fellow brothers and sisters that are still out there earning their badge every day. And then we've recently added the retirement piece into that. Because when you look at that 18 months before retirement and 18 months after, that's one of the most vulnerable points in our lives. And that transition process has been very difficult and very challenging. And we haven't prepared people, especially in emergency services, police, fire, EMS, to make that transition smoothly and with purpose. The military's done a pretty good job with it through the TAP program. But now here in New Jersey, we're trying to develop something that will help first responders, but specifically law enforcement, transition out of uniform and back into the private sector. So I've been doing a lot of that, and I've been taking my training and experience as a drug recognition expert and trying to develop that as a small business on the side. It's been an interesting journey with that as well, seeing what people react to and what they don't. I was hoping that it would be something more than it is now, but what I'm learning is nobody really cares about the whole impairment thing, which is strange. But I still do some of that work as well.
The drug conversation is always interesting.
Very, very interesting. Here in New Jersey, we've legalized, or I should say, decriminalized marijuana and all THC products to a place where it's a free-for-all, essentially. The regulations are minimal. But what we're finding is that there's a workplace impairment problem because of it. So there's a lot of discussion in that. Unfortunately, our legislature here in New Jersey hasn't done a lot to mitigate that problem, because the whole purpose of the three-part law, the decriminalization law they put together, was on a social justice platform. So their theory seems to be, if they go back on some of the workplace stuff, that they're pushing back on their original platform for the law itself. So I'm not sure how that's going to shake out. But here we're having a struggle with it, because we have people in construction industries or any other type of mechanical industries. They're showing up to work impaired because they can, and it's unfortunate. But hopefully we'll get it straightened out. But in the meantime, it's an issue.
Those are challenging conversations. That balance between social justice and unexpected consequences and responsibility, and the balance of law-abiding citizen versus criminal rights. And like, we have all of these places where we have this really big gray area in the conversation where, ooh, we don't touch that. We don't talk about that. We don't go there. But we do need to go there, because it's not us versus them. It needs to be what's best for everyone. And how do we achieve that?
In my mind, it's safety versus not safety.
Right. I think we're losing that clarity of creating safety, because we're trying to do what's right, but we're missing so many pieces. So people are not looking at big pictures anymore. They're looking at one tiny piece and trying to solve one tiny piece, but you don't create laws that way. You have to look.
No, it's true. Without trying to take this conversation off the rails, one of the big pieces that they originally put into New Jersey's legalization process, which has since been removed, they criminalized law enforcement. Literally, it became a fourth-degree crime for law enforcement to tell a parent that they had contact with their child in public who was under the age and using cannabis. Let's process that for a second. As a police officer, you were going to jail for a fourth-degree crime, punishable up to a year in jail. Sorry, fourth degree, so 5 years in jail, $1,000 fine if you told a parent that you had contact with their underage child in possession or using cannabis on the street.
But they have to be 18 to purchase cigarettes.
Correct. Well, in theory, you have to be 21 to purchase any THC product in the state of New Jersey as well. It kind of follows the alcohol guidelines. But essentially what they were doing was they were criminalizing the contact so there wouldn't be any.
Right.
And But that's where this law started out in New Jersey. So priorities.
Yep. Well, and all of that, it's a little bit off the rails, but all of that comes back to,
It's a mental health thing for the cops, for sure.
right, to the experience of being a first responder, having to work in the environment that we're currently working in,
Correct.
having to adapt to the new ways of policing,
Correct.
that they're more at risk than they've ever been of being injured or killed in the line of duty.
Yep.
And they now are accountable for every contact in ways that they've never been before, and they're vulnerable. They're not
Absolutely.
in a position where they can ask questions and stop someone and just say, "Hey, what's up?" Because everything is about, how vulnerable am I going to be in this situation? Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be prosecuted? Like, all of this is in their minds, which drastically increases their stress, which drastically increases fear, which is going to lead to
Bad
inevitably
decisions.
more suicides,
Yep.
more post-traumatic stress diagnosis, more domestic violence, more addiction. Like,
Absolutely.
we're exacerbating this problem instead of focusing on solutions for this problem. So even though it was a little off the rails, it really wasn't.
Yeah, great comeback though, I must say. Great way to tie it together. I love that.
No, everything is
To,
connected.
to put some stats on that, taking out the COVID numbers, because that kind of really skewed law enforcement deaths over the last couple of years. But when you look at officers murdered in the line of duty rather than killed in the line of duty, has been up on an average of 15% year over year for the last 4 years, and which seems like a lot, and it is. And that number shouldn't be going up; it should be coming down. However, law enforcement suicides are up about 50% year over year over the last 5 years. Now we're about 3 times the amount of suicides than we are officers murdered in the line of duty. It's crazy. And a lot of that has to do with the way policing has changed so dramatically, and the ability to not properly adapt to that, because it's such a shift, such a dramatic shift, that it's almost not processable for somebody that's been in the career for a while.
How important do you think social perception is? Do you think that there is a change in the way officers feel about themselves?
Two separate questions, I think, but I think social perception is big, and I can speak from my own personal experiences, but also looking through the window from the outside. One of the biggest pieces that most cops absolutely embrace is the community policing aspect of our jobs. And so that is about making people happy. That is about building relationships. That is about wanting people to appreciate the work that you're doing, not just for them, but with them. Because law enforcement can't police their communities with 100% success on their own. So much of that comes with the shared responsibility of the community itself. And so those relationships and that perception is such a big part of the job, that without it, we have 2 separate dichotomies. You have the law enforcement side and you have the community side. And if we don't bridge that gap, and that comes with mutual respect and admiration of each, it's an unsuccessful position for everybody. So I think that is very important. And then on the other side of that, I think officers certainly thrive on those positive relationships and the community looking up to them as a resource. It's not an ego thing. It can be certainly perceived that way, but I don't believe it to be. It makes you feel purposeful when you can help and support somebody else. And in the law enforcement world, that's why we're there. We're there to protect and serve the community with purpose. And I don't think anybody should get into that job of law enforcement if that's not your goal. If your goal is the good pension or the shiny badge, or the fact that, as we used to call it in the police academy, the CDI factor, the chicks dig it, that's not the reason to get into the job. You have to go into it with purpose, and you have to be there and prepared to serve your community at all costs and build those relationships, because it has to be done together. So yeah, is it hurtful when it goes the other way? For sure. Is it a source of some of the stress? Absolutely. Because if that tension is built there between the agency and the officers and the community, it's not a recipe for success.
No, I often hear, I went into the job because I just wanted to help people. And when I left the job, I felt like everybody hated me.
Yep, absolutely. I hear that all the time. And I think some of that is accurate. But I think so much of it is built on our perception based on our experiences. Again, like I said before, we see the worst in human nature every day. 90% of our job, the calls that we answer, are people's worst moments. Nobody calls to, hey, I need the police. I want to get rid of the coffee that's left in my pot. I wanted to share it with somebody. Like, we don't get those calls. We get the calls when there's domestics. We get the calls when there's, nasty crashes. We get the calls when 15-year-old children just, beat the crap out of a parent. And then they expect us to fix in 15 minutes what they created over 15 years. You're put in these positions to support people in their worst moments, and they want instant gratification from it. That's not life. It's not how it works. So you walk away from your career after, 20, 25 years, and you do think that people hate you because your successes are limited, but it's so important that we point them out to each other. And it's so important that you are recognized for them throughout your career and at the end of your career. One of the things that I always struggled with was we had, these year-end award ceremonies every year. You might get a life-saving medal for having successfully performed CPR and the person's still alive. Or maybe you got something for a rescue that you did, or for saving somebody, whatever. But when you take a step back and the community looks at the accolades that the officer's getting, it's because somebody else literally had the worst day of their life. So it's this really weird mix, but you're not rewarding the officer for that other person's tragedy. You're rewarding that officer for something that they did above and beyond what they're supposed to do. You have to recognize those wins. Otherwise, what's it all for? We don't want to go out of the career only remembering the lives that we lost, the people that we couldn't save. The 18 times we went to the same household for a domestic violence incident, and then the victim was, found deceased a week later, and we couldn't fix that, because that happens more times than we like to admit. But you got to recognize those wins, and you got to support each other through those wins. And at the end of the road, when your time is over and your career's done, that's what you have to remember. Those are the moments you have to capitalize on, because otherwise, what was it all for?
Yep. Can't save everyone.
Nope.
It's the hardest life lesson any of us can ever learn. You can't save everyone. And you do have to celebrate the small wins. And that's everyone. That's not just first responders. Literally, the biggest sign, the biggest telltale for people who are happy and people who have fulfilling lives is the ability to focus on solutions instead of problems, and the ability to see the positive in every single day and to recognize those wins. So that mindset of being able to focus on the wins and accept the losses as just inevitable,
I agree,
can change the outcome so drastically. And those are skills. Changing mindset to follow that pathway is not natural for most people. It's not normal for most people. It's a practice.
absolutely.
Practice because you have to keep trying every single day to do it. So it's just another skill, just another tool in the toolbox.
And that's what we often talk about through the resiliency programs. Is most of the resiliency stuff is a pre-boom exercise. We're not looking to fix anybody on the back end. That you got to do on your own. But if we can give you the tools So when you get to that boom moment, you have them to then spiral yourself back out of that in an upward direction. So you're not going downward into this dark hole. The further down you go, the farther you got to climb out of it. And obviously that's pretty basic, but you can't let yourself sink too far. And one of the phrases we use is catch yourself catching yourself. And it's so important to recognize when you're having that moment or when that slide is occurring, and go back to that toolbox that you were given that over the course of your life, or any course that you took, or any class you've had, and use those tools to kind of find your way back out slowly, but find your way back out. And again, that joy and misery can't live in the same place at the same time. So be grateful for things, see the little wins, understand where you've come from, the positive you've had on others. And I'm not really a religious guy. I know a lot of people in this space are. I try to work on my spirituality as much as I can, but I'm not a religious guy. But one thing that, I've always remembered from my religious school days was to save one life is to save the world. And if you weren't there in that moment, that would have just been another tragedy. So if you can just capitalize on those positive moments and recognize the positive effect you've had on the world, and just keep doing it.
So we are out of time, and I think you just probably summed it up, but what is your final thoughts for our folks out here?
My final thought is just do you. Don't try to be anybody else. Just do you, and stay positive. That whole idea of positive psychology, it's just as contagious as the negativity. So if you can be that bright spot in the room, people will gravitate towards you, and it'll be that ripple effect. You say something positive at 3 a.m. coffee instead of the negativity about somebody at work, that will catch on just as well as the negativity. So be the bright spot, be the positive person in the room.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. This was a great talk and conversation. I'm glad I could support you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today on this episode of Rise Up, Ignite Your Life. And again, that was David Berez, and I am Krista Fee, and I will be signing off. If you like this podcast and want us to keep doing it, you can support the podcast with the button below, or go to battle2be.org, BATTLE, the number 2, BE.org. And know all proceeds from this podcast do go to our 501c3 nonprofit and help us continue to provide post-traumatic and occupational stress resources for those who are struggling. Also to run our Ferryman project for next year, and we are hoping to reach 400 families over the course of next year. So we can't do it without your support. Thank you so much, and have an amazing day.